How's it going, everyone? And welcome once again to another episode of Animal Talk Podcast in collaboration with SACA, the South African Animal Keepers Association. My name is Ryne.
And my name is Ayrton. Hey Ryan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's been a week, but managed to get through it so far. How's your week been?
This week's been okay-ish. It's been, I think, better than last week. The weather's been up and down and not really sticking to a schedule, to say.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. This week's definitely been better than last week, I must admit.
That's really good to hear. And as you've hinted to, we are going to continue our conversation in this episode about scheduling and the impacts.
Part 2.
Yes, part 2, and the impacts of scheduling on animals, where we basically left off with our last episode on scheduling was that as beneficial as scheduling is to us as humans, it's not always great for the animals that we look after, because often it leads to a variety of different problem behaviors. We see animals anticipating things that are going to be happening at a certain time, like feeding or enrichment or presentations, and that can often also lead to stereotypical behavior, boredom, and frustration. But at the same time, it provides us with predictability and comfort. So we're going to continue this conversation, and that's basically where we left it off with our last chat around this.
Yeah, and I think actually, funny enough, our last part where we were talking about was, in fact, environmental changes, natural environmental changes, changing scheduling and changing the way our animals view time. So that could be something we could kick it off with.
Yes, indeed. You know, that's something that's really, really important. I think especially for me, I think it really resonates with me more when I think about an aquarium setting, especially when we have exhibits that are indoors. I know I mentioned this in the previous episode that a lot of our smaller exhibits at the facility where I work are indoors. So that means there's no natural light that those particular exhibits get, and they are under artificial lighting. Those lights are set to, as much as possible, mimic the daylight and sunset that is happening outside. But often we'll have internal events happening, and those lights stay on for longer periods. Or we will have at times, especially change of season, where the light timers are set to go off at, for example, 6 p.m. when the facility closes, but sunset is at 8 p.m. So there's a lot of things we need to really just dive deep into and investigate and think how we can, work around those kind of schedules. I know it can be really complicated because, especially with operating hours, I know for us, if we have events that go on into the evenings, we can already see that there's a lot of algae growth on the viewing panels. Generally, the exhibits need more cleaning because they've been exposed to more light for longer periods. So there's a lot we need to take into consideration when we're looking at facilities, especially that are using artificial lighting for animals. And also going to those animals, their natural history. When would these animals be active? What time of the day? Are they nocturnal? So when are they, when would they be looking for food? Would they be looking for food in the day when we offer it to them? For our schedules as accurate, we're obviously doing our feeds during the day when the public are there. But are these animals supposed to be looking for food, during the night? Because that's what they would be doing naturally. So when we start unpacking all of this, we start realizing that there's actually a lot of work and a lot of things we need to think about when we think about animals in those captive environments under artificial lighting, because you're not only controlling when the lights are on and off, but you can really put them into a completely different spin in terms of what they're experiencing as a normal day. So the other things we need to take into consideration when we think about schedules is there's lots of different schedules that we as keepers come up with. Some that I can think of, first of all, when we get to work, is our cleaning and our staff routines. That's something that's, ingrained in us, because we need to get through all our tasks in the day. So we have always the set schedule on what we do, what order we do it in. And by doing it that way, we're also creating a set schedule for the animals whose exhibits we are cleaning. Other things we need to take into consideration is our enrichment. Is that put onto a schedule? Often it is, because we've got a million and one things to do in a day. So we need to try and fit enrichment in some kind of form and shape. So we look at our day and we think, oh, after lunch, I've got a quick 30-minute gap. I can do some enrichment there. But quite often that gets put into a set schedule. And, if you think about enrichment shouldn't also be done at the same time on every day. It should be mixed up. So we got to think about, the type of enrichment we're doing. Have we put the type of enrichment on a schedule? Is the animals getting feeding enrichment 3 times a week on the same days at the same times? We can think about also, again, if it's a different type of enrichment each time, thinking about maybe varying the time that we do it. We spoke a lot in the last episode about feeding schedules. I mentioned and gave the examples that we have very set and restricted feeding schedules because of public feeds and presentations. So thinking about how we do those feeds, but at the same time being able to maybe minimize the presentation feed that the public get to see, taking some of that food portion and providing it at a different time during the day, so that the animals aren't also, as we mentioned, getting this anticipation behavior. They know that food is coming at 4 o'clock, for example. So I know from our animals at the aquarium that there's this anticipation behavior. All the fish start schooling up near the surface because they know that food's going to be coming in. If you think about that, you're shifting the whole dynamic of the exhibit. All of a sudden, you have all the species up in the upper half of the water column. Those territories that they have, that's all been mixed up as well, because now they're all in a smaller space. So there's so much that can play a role in just changing up your feeding schedules as well as how you're feeding. So a really good example I can give you as well is whenever we feed our large exhibits at the facility, we do what we call a saturation or a throw-in feed. And what that basically means is someone stands on a set platform, they've got a bucket of food, and they're throwing it into the exhibits from the top. But if you think about that, that happens at the same time because it needs to fit in with the educational presentation. And then secondly, it's the same method of feeding. So we're not varying the way in which the food is presented to the animals. Often it's also done in a very similar way, so we're not utilizing different parts of the exhibit. And because the feeding is done from a set platform, it also means that quite often where the food gets thrown in, it's very similar locations to what happens on the other opportunities that they get during those throw-in feeds at other parts in the week. So there's so much that you can unpack in terms of scheduling. If you think now of the feeding example that I gave you, not only is the feeding put on a schedule because of the time, but it's also being put on a schedule because of where it needs to happen. It's being put on a schedule of how it needs to be done. So it all starts overlapping and you start seeing, oh, we've got a really big problem with scheduling because everything kind of controls what we are providing for our animals based on those schedules. Another category we could also think about is training schedules. I know, Ryan, you'll probably know this a lot better than me with training birds for show and things like that. You have so much you have to do in your day. You got to fit training sessions in. And quite often those training sessions end up being quite repetitive and they end up being at the same times. So there's, as I mentioned, so much we need to unpack and really rethink how we do things to move away from the scheduling for the sake of us, but also really for our animals.
Definitely. As before you even said training, I was thinking of something completely different, slightly, and that was going back to our previous episode with Haley last week, where we were chatting about keeper development and how training. Some people don't believe that they're training even though they're just doing normal stuff. But anything you do around an animal is training. So some people might feel like it's a lot to deal with, especially like all of the scenarios you've kind of put across. But you could use training as a tool to move the animal to different spots where you can feed or do different behaviors or different things to change it up. So you can use training for that. And yes, you're right. What tends to happen with, for example, the bird show and setting up the birds for show, you've got a very strict schedule because you've got shows at certain times of the day and you have to fit training in between them. So you have to schedule things in. One thing we did try and do is try and not train the same birds around the same time and shift them over to the different schedules. But again, you've only got two different areas to work with or two different times to work with. So yeah, it makes it very, very challenging.
I think as you were saying that now, another thing that's kind of popped into my head is if you think about if you use the bird show, for example, if you said moving those training sessions around so that you're not working with the same bird doing the same thing. Something that I can relate to with training is with our penguins, with the rock hoppers. What we would do is they would actually each have a almost like a station. We would just use rocks that had their names on it, and what we would ask the penguins to do is leave their nest area, come out onto their dedicated rock, and then that's where they would be fed. And the rocks were quite close, to the public so that they could actually come out from the back of the exhibit and the public could see them a lot closer. It worked really well because I could get all the birds to station at the same time. So you had like 12 rockhopper penguins all stationed, and they were actually quite good at staying on their rocks. And that would eliminate one penguin from interfering with the other penguin, if that makes sense. But the thing that I soon realized was we had just built in something that was very convenient for us because we could train the birds to stay in a set location, not interfere while we're working with the other birds. But I started realizing, oh my word, how boring must that be? You in your exhibit, the keepers come in twice or three times a day. They're going to bring you some food. You get asked to stand in the same location, and then you are almost told to just stay there while I work with your friend over here, and I'll come back to you. So what I started doing was starting to move those rocks around, also offering and asking for different behaviors. So maybe A to B sends, so you could send them to their nest and then ask them to come back, or you could ask them to go into the water and then come back out again. So that for me was really a wake up call that it was great from a training perspective and great from a public and educational perspective, because it kind of made everything look like you're in control and you can present and talk and work with the birds, and everybody kind of leaves each other alone. But from really a welfare and well-being for the birds' sake, it really was probably one of the most boring activities that we asked them to do. And one kind of thing that I remember doing was with one of our rock hoppers, and I think we chatted about this quite a while ago, was his name is Alex. He's a rock hopper penguin, and he's actually quite shy. He doesn't enjoy really interacting with people. He doesn't overly enjoy interacting with the keepers. I think when I was still running the Penguin Experience program, he had interacted with 3 different people over the 8 years that I'd worked with the birds. And it was quite strange because people would just come into the experience. It's obviously members of the public, and they would get to sit, quite close to the rock hoppers. And if the rock hoppers wanted to interact with them, they could, but they weren't forced to. And there were 3 guests over the 8 years that Alex just walked over and he just jumped on their lap and interacted with them. And there was no kind of set reason, but he had just chosen that this is someone I was going to interact with. And from that, I could see there was, a little bit of character coming out. Of course, all the penguins have characters, but we started doing shape discrimination training with him. And I started out with a triangle and a circle and a square. I really wanted to do it with the other rock hoppers because they were the ones that were actually more interactive. But surprisingly, when I started doing that training with Alex, and it was throughout the day, it was sometimes in the morning as well, it was so amazing to see how the training sessions just opened up a whole nother world for him. He was more engaging. He was more interested during the feeds. So it was really just amazing to show that a change in his, his daily schedule, with adding something completely different and something completely new, brought out this whole nother side of this animal. And that was also a really memorable moment for me to realize that actually we need to do more.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that happened, because it's so important to remember how important it is for them to experience different things and be able to do different things. Because in the wild, they're not doing the same thing every single day. Like we mentioned in the previous scheduling episode, they're not doing the same thing every single day. So changing their training up, doing different things, exposing him to different situations goes a long way. And it's amazing how you can see it in the animal's behavior, how they perk up and they're like, oh, I'm actually excited about this. This is something new and I want to engage in that and I want to do that and I want to follow that.
I think we also, if I'm thinking on, the lines of enrichment, I think it's not only enrichment. I think, you and I, we're very lucky because we're very tuned into behavior. So when we look at an animal that's standing in the exhibit, we're looking at the behaviors they're exhibiting and the behaviors that they are showing us. And we are following their lead on what those behaviors are telling us. I think for a lot of staff, especially with enrichment, it often just becomes something of compliance. We need to do enrichment. This is what I've got. This is what I'm going to use. This is what I present the animal with. We give it to the animal. We don't really observe what's going on. We know that they're interacting with it for some period, and then we take it out, and that's enrichment done. But I think we really need to, focus on goal-based enrichment first of all. So for those that are listening and you're wondering what is that, it basically means when we are looking at an animal and it's showing certain behaviors, or it's maybe not showing certain behaviors that we would normally see, we're using enrichment to try and encourage that animal to do those behaviors. Really simple example would be if you have a chimp and you are seeing that the chimp doesn't forage a lot, and doesn't like to interact with, the other members in the group, you would try, for example, foraging enrichment. So we would hide food all over the exhibit, and then the chimps are actually encouraged to search for their food in different locations. So it could be scatter feeding, like in the grass, or hiding it in pieces of wood. And that, through foraging enrichment, would encourage that particular animal to not only forage, but it gets the entire group involved, and they would essentially, and the goal would be to get that animal to forage with the other animals in its group. So goal-based enrichment is essential for, changing behaviors that we see in those animals. And I think I just want to encourage everybody, when you are doing enrichment, when you are working with your animals, it's really, really important to be as present as possible. You don't have to, behavior can sometimes also feel like, when you read like behavior documents, it's like reading a textbook. But once you've got the understanding of animal behavior and how that behavior can be changed, it's really important that when you're engaging with an animal, whether it's you doing your cleaning, or you walking past the exhibit, or you're doing enrichment, to really just focus on what's happening and what that animal is telling you through the behaviors that it's exhibiting. And with that enrichment that you're offering, is it actually doing what you need it to do for the animal, or is it just an object that the animal is interacting with and not really benefiting from? Because that's tends to be the problem that we see with, scheduled enrichments, is you have all these cool fun puzzles and feeders and, different items that you're going to give an animal to interact with, but it's put onto a schedule, and quite often those objects are given to the animals, they not necessarily serving the full purpose that they could. Often it's just small tweaks that you have to do with your enrichment to make sure that it's actually getting to the goal that you wanted to provide for those animals.
I think it's so important to remember that what tends to happen with that type of scheduling of those enrichment items is we get so fixated on scheduling that we now just doing it as a tick box scenario. So, oh, I gave a toilet roll, tick, I did the enrichment. But we're not focused on what did the enrichment do? Did we see any behaviors that the enrichment encouraged? Did it encourage the wrong behavior? Did it encourage the correct behavior? Or did it encourage a behavior we've never seen before? All of that has to be documented, but it does tend to become scheduled where you just throw it in. Okay, it's interacted with it. Tick, I've done the enrichment. So I completely agree with you. It's got to be looked at and you've got to be present in the whole situation and watching behavior.
Yeah, I think that takes me back to our other episode we did on record keeping. And
Your favorite.
Our time in a day is always divided because we do have a lot to do. A lot of facilities, we've got a lot of animals that we're trying to look after in our different sections. And often we are given a lot of responsibilities. It's very easy to sit back and say, oh, we can do more. But I also understand that, from a keeper side, there's a lot happening in your day and you need to try fit everything in. So I think maybe at this point we can offer some, easy solutions to what you can do, simple things that we can change in our day, that we can, ultimately change our schedule, that can change the schedules we've built into our animals. So if we think of the examples we spoke about our normal day-to-day cleaning schedule. So we get in at a certain time, we do cleaning in a certain way, and we've got to make opening time so everything's ready and pretty for guests to get in. So I would just encourage you to maybe sit down, write down all the things you have to do in a normal day. It's really nice to, might sound counterintuitive, to make a timetable and a schedule. But if you start listing all the things you have to do in your day and what you normally do and how you do it, you first of all acknowledging that you've got a set schedule that you stick to. And once you are made aware of how you do things and in what order you do them, you can start mixing that schedule up to make little shifts so that it can ultimately change what you do for the animals. So something I really enjoy doing is making that list. If you can print that list out and laminate it so you've got all your normal tasks that you do in a day, and then if you have a whiteboard, you can stick those different tasks up and try and move them around as much as possible so that they are in a different routine. One thing that I can share is I look after the one coral exhibit at the aquarium, and something that I always tend to do is I always clean the coral exhibit and then I move into the ocean exhibit because we have a scheduled feed. So because I'm already going to be in a wetsuit and it's convenient for me, I quickly get into my wetsuit before the feed, get into the coral exhibit, quickly do my clean, and then run over to the ocean exhibit. So something I did the other morning was I was like, actually, I've got some free time this morning. I need to get into the coral exhibits today, but instead of doing it before my normal set routine, I've actually got a gap this morning before we open, and I'm going to get in there then. So just by changing that time around, because I had a gap where I was free, I've ultimately changed the whole schedule of my day, but also the animals aren't going to anticipate me getting into that exhibit at 12 o'clock, before 12 o'clock on the normal schedule. The same can be done with our feeding. So if you think about what time you feed, can you move your feed time 30 minutes before your normal time that you do it, or 30 minutes after? Obviously, this does depend on if there are presentations that happen around the feeding. With our small exhibits, we are able to do this. So it's more easier on the small exhibits or the public presentation feeds, for example. But then also, as I mentioned, trying to feed your animals maybe half the portion during the public feed and keeping the other half of the portion to do a feed at another time during the day. Something I can share with our rays, for example, our stingrays, they get fed in the ocean exhibit. They get fed Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's always at 12 o'clock. That feed lasts between 12 and 12:40 at the most, and then we do cleaning after that. So what that essentially means for our animals is from 7 in the morning when we get in, right up until 12, there's nothing that really happens in that exhibit in terms of feeding. There's no opportunity for them to feed. Then in 40 minutes, divers come in, we offer them food, they have to eat. And after that 40 minutes, so from 12:40 right until 6 when the aquarium closes, there's no opportunity for them to eat again. There is a throw-in feed that happens for the fish, so they can maybe get some food there, but we need to provide them with more opportunities. So what we've been looking at now is training those rays to come up to the surface in the medical pool area. It literally took me 2 or 3 days with the use of targets that they are already used to when we do the ray feeds at the bottom of the exhibit. And the rays are now very comfortable coming into the medical pool, and we can do additional feeds up there to try and, change up their schedule as well. Tying into that would be enrichment. So something I'm looking at is trying to have enrichment devices that can maybe deploy food after hours when the aquarium is closed, or something in the evening, because we know that they are opportunistic feeders. They would be, swimming around looking for food. So it could be something that is maybe frozen and slowly defrosts and then drops into the exhibit. Or it could be a PVC pipe structure in a rockwork that slowly deploys the food. So just thinking outside the box, sometimes it's not always possible, but thinking about how you can move those feeds at different times. And that, again, ties in with your enrichment, how often you're doing enrichment, your categories of enrichment that you're using. How are you mixing those up in the day? Are you doing enrichment at different times? How often are you doing enrichment? I think the phrase that annoys me the most is what I've heard quite often is, providing your animal with no enrichment for a day is also enrichment. No, that's boredom. So really, you have to kind of really think outside the box and not stick to your daily work schedules. Just see where you can mix up things. I know it's difficult. I know we all have a lot to do, but I really, really think this is an important topic and an important thing that we need to look across the board for all our animals in facilities.
Definitely. Wow, that's a lot of food for thought. And I think there's a lot of things that people need to think about when it comes to rescheduling their schedules.
Indeed.
But if you guys are interested in getting hold of us and maybe asking some more questions on the topic, or you have a topic that you would like us to discuss, please feel free to contact us. We really love to hear from our listeners. It's so nice to hear from you guys and see how you feel about the podcast or any ideas that you have. So you can either email us on animal.talk201@gmail.com, or you can contact us on social media.
We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Please go and visit our YouTube channel, subscribe, like our various podcast posts, and then also go follow us on Instagram, find us on Facebook. Our handle is Animal Talk Podcast _ZA. So you can find us there. And you can also leave comments on our podcasts, on the YouTube channels, on Instagram. So if you do have any questions or any comments for us, you can reach out to us there as well.
Yep. So don't forget to also share our podcast. It's so nice to see people sharing it on their stories, on Instagram or on WhatsApp, and just getting us out there, because really it's all about keepers and about people looking after animals and giving them the opportunity to hear what's happening out there and just giving more knowledge. So that's great. And also, we're on a radio station, a digital radio station called eRadios. For those of you that are listening from the radio station, thank you very much for listening in. And also, don't forget, if you want any more information about Sarka, it's pretty easy. You can find Sarka on Instagram or Facebook. You can also find Sarka on the website, which is sarka.org.za. And you can get a little bit more information about the South African Animal Keepers Association. And from myself, remember, animals are our passion.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Remember to go relook at your schedules, and remember that our quality of care is their quality of life. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Okay, let's... Oh, good. Now the holidays calling in the background. Okay, here we go.